Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for joining us for one of our talks today. I am so thrilled today to be joined by the incredible creative team behind the movie Materna. We have David Gutnik, who is the writer and director, Liz Cardenas, who is the producer, Assol Abdullina, who's an actor and also writer on the film, and Rory Culkin, who's an actor in the film. And David, I wanted to start with you because I
Sure.
think what part of the beauty of this film is the fact that it's telling this large overarching story, but also it's doing so through these really intimate character portrayals. And it's such an interesting structure in terms of approach and the way that you're able to tell both a large narrative arc and individual arcs in this really unique way as well. So I was really interested in the genesis and what really led you to that specific creative choice.
Right. Thank you for saying all those wonderful things, for your question and for having us here. It's a real treat. So yeah, I think the place to start is uh, I was at a sort of vulnerable place in my life and was looking to deal with where I was at in work. Uh, More honestly and more directly, with greater sensitivity than I had in the past. And I had been talking to Assol and Jade separately. I met Jade in an acting class. I'd taken a summer class. I was doing a lot of slumming at acting classes in schools in New York, just sitting in on classes, watching actors suffer and getting my fix from that. um, and um, and I hit it off with one of the teachers, and she invited me to sit in on her conservatory 2 nights a week for a year. So that's I met Jade sitting in on her conservatory, and then I met a soul through sort of the Russian speaking uh, extended Russian speaking creative community in New York City. And so yeah, the project started with us just kind of confiding in each other separately about what we were going through, and there was a baseline of some of our personal struggles, and but also other kind of more other connections. We're all sort of children of, well, I wanted to say children of immigrants. Assol is an immigrant herself, but I think we're all New Yorkers. But I think there's something about being from that place that connected us as well. And and yeah, in the beginning, we didn't quite know what form this would take. We just knew we wanted to express and dramatize and uh, our personal shit. Can I say that?
Yeah.
um, and uh, and yeah, and so over the course of that process, it started to tell us what it wanted to be, the form it wanted to take. The stories sort of, I mean, we knew going in that they were kind of variation theme, and that there was a lot of echo and rhyme in them. So yeah, eventually it told us what it wanted to be, and what you see is what it became.
I really love that genesis and that journey. And then Asol, with your part in writing on the script as well, it sounds like you were writing a character and a character piece, but at the same time that there were personal elements of yourself coming forth. And you've spoken about how writing is something that you don't necessarily always love to have to do. And so from having it come from such a personal space, was that something that made it an easier part of the process for you? Or did it actually make it a little bit more challenging in figuring out what facets of yourself you wanted to allow to flow into this character and her journey?
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. Yes, and honestly, still, I do not like writing. Like, I avoid writing anything at any costs, including like text messages and emails. Um, but yes, definitely, it was. much easier to write because it was all based on personal experiences, personal feelings. I knew the characters through. I knew the setup, I knew the environment, I knew the country and the culture, and like I knew those things. And it was just the matter of kind of like fishing for the scenes and deciding what's important, how to tell the story. Yeah.
And then, Rory, I wanted to talk about your character's dynamic in terms of his relationship with his sister, because you appear on screen and so instantaneously have to capture the history and the dynamic between the two of them. And when they're disagreeing about things and getting into arguments, you really get the sense that they've had these conversations so many times before, just different versions of it, which was a really interesting dynamic to watch play out between the two of you. And so I was very interested in how you set about really shaping that so that the moment you appear on screen, we know exactly what that dynamic between these two characters is.
I would just give credit to Lindsay Burge. I mean, she had to say some interesting things, and like she said it with such conviction, it was pretty easy to want to like hit back verbally. And yeah, I don't know, it was just really well written. Yeah, but I would give credit to Lindsay a lot of our dynamic. Yeah.
Love it. And then, Liz, in terms of producing, it's obviously one really cohesive narrative feature, but then also in watching it, it also feels like it was probably multiple different mini productions in essence as well. And so from a producing standpoint, I was really interested in what the creative challenges behind executing that were for you.
It's exactly what you're talking about in terms of, you know, wanting tone and the, like you're talking about the arc. It's like we kind of talked about the fact that there's each female character in each of the stories, but then they also represent like one female character. And so, you know, trying to have the arc in each story and then overall. But I think what we wanted to do was kind of like lean in. And as a creative producer, I'm looking at logistically, and then I'm also working closely with David creatively. So what excited me about the project was the collaboration. And when he was talking earlier about it being kind of very organic, you know, I responded to each of these stories. And then when David was talking about how you would connect all of them, because the themes were universal, you know, and sitting and reading drafts and going over everything, it was super exciting. And so then it was like these conversations that Emily McAvoy, my other producer, and I and David were having, in that leaning into the specificity of each character. And then therefore it's almost like these universal themes will kind of come to the surface and connect them. And so it was challenging in, you know, you're working with different crew in a lot of cases, obviously different cast, and each production was kind of seen individually, like we shot them in different sections. So that was challenging, but kind of exciting. And then it ended up being really cool. Like there was something nice about having a little bit of a reset between each of these productions. And, you know, this is an independent film. It's not like a big budget film. And so often you're working, if you've got like a 3-week shoot, you're working on week 1 and you're dealing with stuff for week 3. This was really nice to focus on one at a time. So it was challenging, but it was also very exciting and I think very rewarding.
And then, you know, to that point as well about the fact that there are those overarching themes and topics throughout the film. For Assol and Rory, I was interested for the two of you. Did you find it helpful at all to talk to David and really think about the elements of what the larger conversation that the film was having were? Or did it make more sense for each of you just to really focus on the individual moments for your character and that performance in that moment?
No, I sort of tunnel vision. Just my project is what mattered, and I trusted David that he would weave it together. When, you know, didn't need my help. I was just selfish in that aspect.
And then, David, one of the things that I loved visually is the fact that it almost feels like, in essence, there's a different visual language for each of these stories. But again, that linear feeling and aesthetic at the same time. And so, when you started to think about things like the way that you really wanted to use the camera to tell a story and a lot of the framing and palette and lighting elements, how did you think about the small spaces where you really wanted to tell each story in a slightly different way, but still have that connective thread?
Right. Yeah, I appreciate that question. I feel like I didn't fully answer your first question about, because it's smart, your focus on how we negotiated seems to be like a running theme throughout the questions, how we negotiated the macro and the micro, the global picture and these individual pictures. And Liz sort of touched on this idea of a single journey, and that was something we really cracked in the edit, and that was an important idea. I think in the beginning of the edit, we were structuring the film a bit more like almost like a playlist, like what song would be right to come after this, and get the dynamics and the contrast and the rhythm right. But at some point, we stumbled upon this idea of thinking about it more dramaturgically, and that there is an arc, a single heroine's journey, and that that over the course of the narrative, things would get just progressively a smidge better for that soul, if you will, that single soul that unites all of them. So kind of moving from a place of total disconnection and total depopulation, total loneliness, and one body, and over the course of it, kind of moving to a place of some contact and some reconciliation and of family fracture and bond. And as for on a visual cinematographic level, so the way that I worked with Assol and Jade, our process was, and Assol, maybe you can expand a bit, but my healing process was to listen, to take the position of a listener, in the same way that, like, when somebody's telling you something they went through, and you can connect, and you're like, oh, okay, I feel less alone. So for me, there was this idea that the camera would play that role of a listener and an observer, without judgment, and so if we could lean into that for all of them, no matter the differences, that would be a kind of unifying perspective. Second, key principle was this idea of kind of the primacy of subjectivity. For each character, the form had to be a kind of extension of the interior life of the character. So everything she sees and hears is expressed visually. The camera is like slavishly devoted to the idea of her perspective. And so, of course, each of them are different. So that's going to take on different shapes and flavors and tone. But that idea of 100% subjectivity is also, even though it has different expressions, it's still a single unifying idea. So that is, even though it comes out different, it is also aesthetically and stylistically unifying. And then finally, this idea of this question guided each of the stories: how do you photograph absence? In each of them, there is some invisible force that the characters are wrestling with, whether it's a virtual person, or it's a mom that's not there, or it's an incident that people have to get to the bottom of, that's mysterious, or in the case of the final story, a deceased person whose ghost is present. So that question was expressed differently in each of them, answered differently in each of them, but it was still a unifying idea that. So because we had these kind of core principles, I think we felt like we could go as far as we could in terms of letting them be their own, while still having a kind of home to come back to.
And Assol, off the back of that, and the fact that your character is going through that absence with her uncle having died recently, and really navigating that with family members. At the same time, we get such a sense of his presence and who he was in her life and what that relationship dynamic was. And so I wanted to ask you about the journey of really shaping that so that he's a character that still has a lot of presence within those scenes, even though it's not a character on screen.
I never thought about this. It's a very good question. Interesting. I don't even know. I guess so. So David was always telling me this thing. What was it like? You can't stuff a whole fish in your mouth. You have to like eat it by piece. Something like that.
You can't. Yeah, it's a Stanislavskiism. You can't eat a whole turkey all at once. You got to start with a wing or you know, like.
Right. So the goal, like, it was never my intention to, here it is. It was never my intention to make a portrait of him or make his presence visible or felt. It was always my yearning to learn about him. You know, I did not have a very I did not have a relationship I wish I had with my uncle. And also I've been in the United States for so long that, you know, when it's like grief, you always think, you blame yourself thinking that what if we had a good relationship? What if? So my journey was to find out as much as I can about him. And there is this yearning to just look for details, look for little things you can, you know, hold on to. So I guess like making this little bits and pieces, putting them in, kind of created, as you say, his presence, which is, thank you for saying that. I love that.
And Rory, when it comes to your scenes, there's such an element of building tension, and then there's a real crescendo point for your character. And it seems like in watching that scene in these moments that there's a real art and dance to balancing reaching a point where he takes an action that is definitely very shocking, but that by the point this happens, it doesn't necessarily feel surprising because we understand the journey that he's gone to reach this breaking point within himself. And so how did you set about really approaching that gradual build of tension within him as a character in those moments?
Well, it's yeah, it's interesting because I'm hitting a child across across the face, and somehow it seems completely justified. And when we saw it with an audience, I got the feeling that everyone sort of agreed with that moment, which is strange because, you know, obviously it's not cool, but yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting seeing this sort of intellectual just lose all reason and just you know, some people can be so frustrating that you just act out and lash out sometimes. And yeah, I don't know. Like I keep saying, but it's completely just submitting to David's vision and yeah, it made all the sense in the world to me to hit my nephew in the face in that moment. Yeah, I don't know what that says about me. I'm gonna stop talking.
I think it's going to make everyone who watched it by themselves and had that reaction feel better to hear that audiences generally responding in that way.
Great. Yeah.
Did you really hit him? Or
No, we were professionals. He was yeah, I don't think I did. No, we were good, right, David?
Yeah.
And you know, those scenes early on when we first meet Rory's character's nephew, and a lot of other moments in the film, David, you very frequently also choose what to not show us. So we don't see his nephew at the beginning when they're having a conversation. We do see him later on for that culmination in that moment. And with all of the characters, there's so many moments where even if it's because the camera is in such a close up, that you're choosing as much what to show us as you are what not to show us. And so I was very, very curious about the framing choices that you made in that regard.
Specifically with regard to
The way that you chose also what to not show us in a scene, as much as you also bring us really close with the camera.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, again, this goes back to this question of it's a good question, of the sort of leaning into subjectivity and prioritizing that above everything else. It's like when you have, it's when you have a value system or, a principle system for how you're making choices. It's, if you're really kind of adhering to these principles, it's frustrating because it's not a democracy. It's it's a totalitarian dictatorship of idea. So you kind of have to be in. You can't have it all. You can't have it both ways. If you're in one place, you can't be in the other. But I think there's also something to that is an important part of the language and grammar as well. In the first story, you're not really getting much in the way of exposition. You're not really getting much in the way of information. You're getting a lot of questions. So in a way, that's also a kind of framing or not showing, in that it encourages collaboration from the audience. And that is, I think, it has to do with the subjectivity as well. Like, if you can make somebody want to see what's outside the frame, it's like if you say 2 + 2 and then someone else can say 4, then they've collaborated with the hero or the heroine to get there, and then they've experienced it with them. And that creates a subjective, kind of identification between somebody who's watching and the person through whom they are watching, the vessel, the actor. So that's something, we hoped for. Also, not to just talk too much, tell me if I am, but there's something that is funny about a reaction shot, for example, right? It's like the idea of a reaction shot is so embedded in our DNA. Like, we don't know how to feel about the world or things or other people until we see somebody react. Until we see, oh yeah, okay, then I should like this, or oh no, then I shouldn't. This is okay, this isn't, because someone reacted and told you what's okay and what isn't. And so when you spend so much time on faces, it's a little bit sort of morally and ethically destabilizing because you're not getting those cues. So you just have to kind of live in the skin of the character and figure out, what's right and wrong, as opposed to, so I don't know if that answers your question, but.
It does. And then, Liz, I wanted to talk a little bit more about your collaborative relationship in working with David on this, especially with how you were speaking to some of the unique aspects of this film in terms of the challenges from the back end. And in particular, kind of what that initial collaboration during the development process looked like, because so many elements of what you're doing behind the scenes really work to set up what that creative vision is ultimately going to look like once the film goes into production. And so what did those early conversations and collaborative moments look like between the two of you?
Well, it's interesting because David has been really vocal about, kind of being in a vulnerable place and wanting to collaborate, and talked about that with Jade and Assol. And I feel like the same kind of thing happened with David and myself. We met in a kind of creative social space. It was like a Sundance party at IFP in New York, which is a program that helps, first and second time feature filmmakers. And we both had films that we were working on, him as an editor and me as a producer. And then we kept in touch. And then both those films went to Sundance, and then I was back in New York the next year because I'm not a New Yorker. And so, I tell this story a lot because I look at it fondly, in which, David was talking to me about this project, but it was so much greater than a project. And we were sitting on his stoop in Brooklyn and talked through the night. And again, I love New York City, but I'm not a New Yorker. So that just felt like such a cool experience. And we're just talking about movies and art and life and feelings. And, I had just lost my father. And so it was all these like personal stories and women's stories, which I really want to tell. And then I really felt like he had this super unique vision. So I trusted that. But then at the same time, he really wanted to collaborate, and that we were kind of open to seeing what it could become. And there was just something that was like super exciting about that. But I think, Assol and Rory have commented on this kind of trust. You have to trust the director, this trust, and everyone did have these special kind of relationships, and it was a magical experience.
And off the back of that, I wanted to wrap up by asking each of you about what aspect of this process in making this film you found to be the most creatively fulfilling, that you really felt like you had the opportunity to learn from within the experience. And Rory, I'm going to come to you first.
I don't know. I just really like debate on camera. I just really like the arguing, no matter which side I take. I just yeah, it was, yeah. And I just like that we're both sort of hard-headed and disagreeing. And it was, yeah, I mean, there was a lot for me to grab onto and to learn from, for sure.
Amazing. And how about for you, Assol?
Well, just writing gave me a lot of new knowledge. But I want to say that there is another aspect that I'm definitely learning a lot from, is actually doing these Q&As. Because, one thing is to be like emoting, but the other thing is to be able to like put in words, conceptualize, and look back and see what it is exactly you're doing and what is the influence from that and how to communicate about that. And of course, there is like the whole atmosphere involving politics and social issues. So I'm learning a lot from this process of talking about the writing, the acting, the project, all that, which is also very fulfilling creatively. It's informing like future projects.
Amazing. I love to hear that. And what about for you, Liz?
On a personal level, I'm also a writer, director, actress, and I feel very comfortable working with actors because of being an actor. But personally, I really enjoyed watching David work with the cinematographer. And though, like, I really wanted to kind of like listen in and absorb what I could, and learned a lot from, like, again, like you're saying, like, how are you telling the story visually based on the characters' inner life and emotions and the emotion of the scene. But in an overall thing, as far as like what this experience brought me was, I feel like as a producer, it's my job to try to bring the vision of the director as close to possible, so that it can live a life on screen. And in part of this organic process, it was always, trusting what was right, and always like not settling. And so in some cases, you're doing things like closer to a deadline because we hadn't found the right thing yet. We hadn't found the right location. We hadn't cast the right actor yet. And that's very stressful for me because I'm somebody like that always wants to do a good job. But the thing that I really learned throughout this process was the little decisions that you're not settling make the overall picture so much better and so much greater. And even if it was stressful and really challenging, I really feel like we look back and we got phenomenal actors and performances. We got amazing locations. The cinematography is gorgeous. So we've got great DPs, like every production design, all these things. And it's like all the small little details add up. And that was like something that, again, we communicated throughout the process of like not settling. And it really hit me hard, and is something I'm taking with me in the future.
Yeah. And what about for you, David?
Yeah, I just kind of, I'm piggybacking off everything that was just said, that Assol and Liz just said. I'm learning so much just from listening to you all speak about the film, and I'm learning so much from, like, because a lot of these thoughts, like, you have to kind of think them out loud to form them. And so even just, I keep talking about Mike Lee, and I don't know why. I didn't know that he was as important to me as it turns out he is. But, you know, just like what you were saying, Liz, about not settling, and then what Rory and Assol were saying earlier about just being kind of tunnel with your character. You know, I was listening to Mike Lee on a podcast, you know, and the interviewer asked, like, you know, most directors, when they watch their films, like, they have a really hard time. It's like, you know, you get sick watching it. And you know, Mike Lee's like, well, you know, I don't really have that problem. I love watching my films, you know. And they asked, like, well, why? And he said, I live separately, work with my actor for a couple of years, and we go off and we write it as we're working it out. None of the actors kind of know what the other actor is doing or how the rest of the story is playing out. You know, most directors are looking at their films and seeing all the compromises they made, who they cast because they needed financing and this and that and the other. And he said, I don't have that problem. I don't make those compromises. But I also, you know that I'm in a very privileged position and that I get to work the way that I do. So, you know, and it's funny because we kind of made our movie that way, you know, and I've watched the movie now more than 100 times, and I love watching it. I love watching all these beautiful, brilliant faces and actors, and all the work that was done in creating these images and everything, the way it looks and sounds, and the music. And I was an editor, you know, I've spent a lot of time in my life alone in a dark room with at most one other person. And, you know, I like myself, but I don't like myself that much. I think I'm interesting, but I don't think I'm that interesting that I want to spend most of my time alone. So I wanted to work with other artists. And one of the priorities, as Liz was, like, not settling and, you know, working with people that whose talent you're in love with, like truly in love with. We would not shoot unless we knew we were in love with our cinematographer, with our actor, with our producer, with these decisions were life, death, high stakes decisions. It had to be love. And, you know, I wanted to work with masters. I wanted to learn from, you know, I'm not the one playing the saxophone. I'm not the one putting the ball in the hoop. And it was just, I wanted to watch people play the saxophone and just, that is just, and I had that every day on set with these actors. You know, there's very little I had to do and say on set because the musicians and the saxophonists and the basketball players were all Michael Jordan, you know. So that was something I learned, that I just want to keep working this kind of way if I can. So yeah.
Well, I want to congratulate all of you so much on the film, and thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. And hopefully other people will go and watch the film 100 times as well.
Yep.